On this video, I'll talk about my top 3 best gaming PCs for 1080p that you can actually build right now. So keep in mind that these are not Prebuilt PCs. If you wanna see a Prebuilt PC video, you have my top 5 best Prebuilt PCs for the month of March in 2022 in the top right of the screen, but I'll actually update that list in a couple days, so make sure to click the bell button if you wanna get notified when I upload that video. With that being said, I will go over an ultra budget gaming desktop for 1080p gaming that's actually pretty good for the price, and then I will talk about the max I would have spent on a gaming PC for 1080p. I wouldn't spend more money than the last one that I showed, and I will explain why in a second. But now let's start with the first PC. With the first build, I went ahead with a micro ATX build just below $700, where you get the i3-12100F. Right now it's not in stock. When I made this build a couple days ago, it was in stock, so keep in mind that these CPUs are hard to find, so you have to be looking basically every single day until you find one. But if you find one, it's really good for 1080p gaming on a budget. Remember that we are talking about gaming PCs, not streaming, not video editing PCs, but I actually talk about on how to upgrade this PC to make it good for streaming and also video editing. But for now, these PCs are for gaming. Then for the motherboard, I went with the ASRock B660 micro ATX option. This motherboard doesn't come with Wi-Fi included. If you want Wi-Fi, you will need another adapter that I didn't include on this build. Then I went ahead and picked 16 gigs of RAM, 2x8 at 3200 MHz CL16 memory. This will be more than enough for 1080p gaming, and nowadays 16 gigs is the standard basically. For the storage, I picked 500 gigs of M.2 SSD. Remember that I'm trying to make this build as cheap as possible. Of course, you can go with 1 TB and is what I recommend, but these are upgrades that you can make down the line if you don't have the budget to do it right now. Then for the graphics card, I went with the controversial RX 6500 XT. Remember, this PC is for you to upgrade it down the line, but actually for 1080p gaming is not a bad GPU, even though it gets a lot of hate. I think that for 1080p gaming, the 6500 XT is really similar to the GTX 1650 Super, and if you want to play at 1080p 60 FPS on average in games like GTA 5 on the highest settings, the 6500 XT will be more than enough. And if you want to play competitive games such as Fortnite and Valorant, with this GPU and CPU combination, you will be able to average more than 140 FPS. So if you want a 140 Hz experience, I think this 1080p build is actually going to be great, and you also save a lot of money because you are not even spending $700. For the case, I picked the Deepcool Matrix 40 Micro ATX case, and I went ahead and picked 3 RGB case fans for the front, so you will have some RGB and the airflow is going to be pretty decent, and for the hardware that you're getting, it's going to be basically excellent for the CPU and GPU temperatures, so you don't have to worry about this. And then for the power supply, which is one of the most important parts on a gaming PC if you want upgradability, I went with a 650 watt 80 plus gold power supply. I know it's a totally overkill for this type of build, but remember that I did want to make this as upgradable as possible. So let's say in the future you want to swap the CPU to the i7-12700K and the GPU to maybe like the RTX 3060 or 3060 Ti, you will be able to do this because you have this Corsair 650 watt power supply. So for 1080p gaming, like I said before, you will be able to play basically any single game at 60 FPS or more. So if that's what you're looking for and you're not looking to spend a lot of money, I think this one is great, and you can make those upgrades down the line because like I said before, this PC is upgradable. Now, if you want to make this PC better for video editing, I would upgrade the i3-12100F to the i3-12100, the non-F version. This will help you out with video editing, especially at 1080p. And another thing that I would upgrade for video editing is going to be the storage. I would put at least a terabyte, although I would recommend 2 TB of SSD because the files while editing a video are really large, and believe me, I edit a lot of my videos and sometimes it takes a lot of storage. So 2 TB of SSD and the i3-12100 will make actually a huge upgrade without having to spend a ton of money. Now if you want to go with more upgrades for video editing, I would go with 32 gigs of RAM instead of 16, and you can change the CPU cooler maybe to a better cooler, but this will make a difference for video editing anyway. But if you're looking for gaming, I think under $700 this is the best that you can get right now, considering that it's upgradable. Now let's talk about another build, and this is the most I would spend on a gaming PC for 1080p gaming. At $1,300 we get the i5-12400F, an Arctic Freezer CPU air cooler, which is going to work work great with this i5, an MSI V660 with Wi-Fi included, then 16 gigs of RAM once again, 2x8 CL16 3200 MHz, 1TB of SSD. Then for the graphics card, which is basically the most important part for gaming, I would go ahead and pick the RX 6600 XT. This is a great GPU for 1080p gaming, and it's also capable of 1440p at 60 frames per second, of course depending on the game that you play and depending on the settings. But if you want a 1440p 60Hz monitor, I think this gaming PC is actually the entry point, but for 1080p it's actually going to be more than enough, and I wouldn't spend any single dollar extra on a gaming PC for 1080p gaming. Then for the case, I went with the Fantex Eclipse P360A ATX case. This is great for the airflow overall. Then I went ahead and picked a 750 watt 80 plus gold power supply, so once again an overkill for this build. But let's say you want to swap components to make it capable of 1440p 240Hz, or maybe you want to buy a 4K 144Hz monitor, then you will need to upgrade this PC and the power supply will allow it. But basically for 1080p, any single video game, even the high demanding video games such as Microsoft Flight Simulator 2020, this one will be able to handle it really well at 1080p. And for those esports titles that I've mentioned before, it's going to be able to average way more than the last one, basically at around 240 FPS on the lowest settings, which is what you're aiming for on this type of games. So if you want a 240Hz monitor, feel free to pair it with this PC build. And talking about monitors, I have a friend who've made a new channel for gaming, and his first video was about monitors. I leave it in the top right of the screen as well if you're looking to buy one or you're not sure on which monitor is actually going to be the perfect pair for this type of PC. Then go ahead and watch that video. He's doing an amazing work and he helped me through a lot for this channel, so make sure to check him out. And lastly, I picked one case fan to put at the back of the gaming desktop. Now, like I said before, if you want this to be better for video editing, I'm talking about 1080p video editing, I would change the CPU to the i5 12400 non-F version and upgrade to 2TB of SSD. And if you want to do a lot of multitasking, then I would also go with 32 gigs of RAM instead of 16. Then there's a bonus PC build that's around 1738 bucks. This is more money that I would spend, of course, but it's more of a 1440p 144 type of gaming desktop, and it's also way better for editing than the last two PCs. So if you want to do some heavy video editing and maybe you have a 1080p monitor but you're pretty sure that you want to upgrade it to a 1440p or even a 4K 60Hz monitor, I think this one is actually going to be worth it, since you get the i5 12600K, a great CPU for both video editing and gaming. Especially for video editing, you don't need the i7 if you're not going to do some really heavy video editing. Then you get a way better CPU cooler with 240 all-in-one liquid cooler. Then for the motherboard, you get the Asus Prime T690 PY-Fi motherboard. This one has a great audio for video editing. Then I went ahead with 16 gigs of RAM and 1TB of SSD. My mistake, maybe 2TB and 32 gigs will be way better, but it will be more expensive, so keep that in mind. And then for the graphics card, I went ahead and picked the RTX 3060 Ti, which is going to be a better option than the RX 6600 XT, especially because you get better technologies such as ray tracing and DLSS, and it's also better for gaming overall. So like I said before, if you're looking for a 1440p/4K gaming desktop and video editing for around $1,700, I think this one will be great. You also get a better case for the airflow, the Corsair 4000D, alongside 3 RGB case fans, so it will look great. And if you want to upgrade it, upgrade the storage, upgrade the RAM, and if you really want RGB, upgrade the CPU cooler to an RGB 240 all-in-one liquid cooler. But I think this build is excellent for the price if you have the budget too. So those were my favorite PCs for 1080p gaming. The last one is an overkill for 1080p, and I would actually recommend it more for 1440p instead of 1080p. If you found it helpful, leave a like and subscribe, but most importantly hit the bell button so you get notified when I upload this type of content. And remember that if you don't know anything about monitors, check the video in the top right of the screen. It will help you out a lot. Thank you guys for watching, thank you for the support, and I will see you on the next one.